So I'm actually really excited to talk today at the Metaphysical Center. And the reason that I'm so excited about that is because I definitely have a resonance with the concept of the metaphysical, with the idea of seeing the whole person and not just, the physiological, functional aspects of people, but seeing them in their whole form. And so that is one of the reasons I wanted to speak here, and also one of the reasons I'm very excited. So before I jump in too deeply, what I want to do is I want to share a poem that I like, and it's a good one. I learned it many, many years ago, and it's called The Torchbearer. Are any of you familiar with that at all? So it goes, "The God of the great endeavor gave me a torch to bear, and I lifted it high above me in the cold and murky air. Straightway with glad hosannas, the people acclaimed its light, and they followed me as I carried my torch the dark and starless night. Till mad with the praises of people and drunken with vanity, I forgot it was the torch that drew them, and fancied they followed me. And my arms grew sore and weary upholding the shiny load, and my tired feet went stumbling over the hilly road, and I fell with the torch beneath me, and in a moment the flame was out. But lo, from the throng a stripling youth sprang forth, and with a mighty shout caught up the smoldering torch and lifted it high again, till it fanned and drove everyone away with them. And as I lay alone in the darkness, the feet of the trampling crowd passed on far beyond me, and their voices proclaimed aloud. And I learned in the deepening shadow this glorious verity, 'tis the torch the people follow, whoe'er the bearer may be." And I point that out because I think too often we look at ourselves as being the source of knowledge in some subject, whether it be fasting, whether it be spiritual enlightenment, whether it be any, physical, mental, or spiritual discipline. And what we forget is that many people before us carried that torch. And that torch is the thing we have to look to. We have to realize that that torch is what guides us. And we all have that. And so everything starts with a story. So this man on your left here, if you guys don't know, he is the Guinness Book of World Records holder for fasting. Not this guy. He's just sad because he wants to pee. But if you look at this guy, this was him before, this was him afterward. And I believe he went somewhere around 390 something days of fasting. So he went a year and a month, basically. And it was very interesting. All he had during that time were some vitamins. He had some amino acid-like supplement they had him take, and some electrolytes. And then towards the end, the last month, he had a little bit of milk and sugar in his drinks. But he lost a tremendous amount of weight. And 5 years later, that weight was basically still gone. His goal weight was 180 pounds. He got there, and I think he was 198 5 years later. So he did really well. Now, the reason I bring him up as an example is that he was the last person to actually be given that title in the Guinness Book of World Records because of the dangers that people felt fasting was for people. In other words, they were fearful that people would compete for that, and then people would get sick and have problems. And so the other side to this is to show that it's actually possible to do a lot more than we think we can do. And one of the most common things, I'll bring this up again, one of the most common things I hear when I give people the assignment, if they're willing to accept it, of fasting, is that they have hypoglycemia. That's almost almost always the most common excuse I hear, which a lot of people do have hypoglycemia, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can't fast. Your body adapts, so there's ways around that. So I also like to tell a little bit of story about myself. So fasting is something that I have done personally many times. I've done various forms of it. So the first time that I did fasting, the very first time was as a member of the Mormon church, a long time ago. And during that time, they would fast every month, and then eventually I'd start doing it. And when I did a dry fast one time for about 2 or 3 days. And on the third day, it was too much, and I had to drink water, and I think I almost dehydrated myself. And then later, down the road, I was introduced to the Master Cleanse. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. A lot of people know the Master Cleanse, which I think is a great cleanse. I actually like it a lot. I think we know more than they knew back then, but I still think it's fantastic in a lot of ways. And so I did that, and I did the first time I got away with 5 days, and then I jumped off of it. And then the second time I actually did the full 10 days, which is kind of the minimum that they shoot for with it. And then I went and I did intermittent fasting later in life, and I've done all of the different forms of intermittent fasting, which we're going to discuss, with varied results. And finally, I caught on to this alternate day fasting, which was fantastic for me. I felt so great on that. And that was every other day fasting. And lost a lot of weight, felt great, and I learned a lot about the importance of fasting because of my personal experiences and working with a lot of cancer patients and working with a lot of patients over the years, just recommending prescribed fasting. So, this I think is very important to bring up. I always bring this up because this is actually a true psychological phenomenon that I'm pointing out here, the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's very real. So what happens is, when we know a little bit about something, we actually think we know a lot more about something. And every human being does this, including myself, and there's a lot of things that I'm probably still guilty of with that. But I've also been here too, many times, where I realize I don't really know anything. My confidence level goes way down. And I think as a physician, I'm probably somewhere in here over the years. I don't consider myself a guru. I feel like by the time you're a guru in something, and your confidence and your knowledge is so high in whatever that field is you're in, you're taking most of your time writing books and teaching people, and it spreads and disseminates that way. I still really love working individually with patients. That's my favorite thing to do. And so many of us have been here, I'm sure, and many of us have fallen. So please, if there's something in here, because I do a lot of research on the things I put together. If there's something in here I'm wrong about, or you see something that you're like, hey, I don't think that's right, research it. Let me know. So none of us are perfect. So at the end, we'll do questions at the end of this, so that I think there's a couple issues. One is the directionality of the mic for people this is recorded for. So at the end, we want to be able to hear the questions and answer them. All right, so here's the overview of today's presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, naturopathic medicine, Mederi Care. For those of you who have gone to these before, you're going to hear this for like however many times. So I'm going to go over this. Then we're going to dive into the fasting. Okay? So, I always show the same pictures. I should change them, huh? So, this is my family and my wife. I have 3 kids. And this is a big part of who I am. And so I'd like to make sure that everyone understands that who we are is not just what we do. Does that make sense? Like, we're not necessarily just our job or our occupation. And almost always that's how we see people. Oh, that's the doctor. That's the whatever, the librarian, or whatever type of label we've given. But that is just a small piece of who that person is. And we have our family and our loved ones, and we have hobbies and things that we love to do. And then on top of that, we have our whole selves, which is, mental and physical and spiritual and energetic, all of these different aspects of who we are. And so this is us. We're hiking in Sedona. And this is actually when we lived in Mesa. And so I'm born and raised in Arizona, Cottonwood, Arizona, a little town. And I went to school a little later in life. I didn't do school like everyone else did. I didn't do my high schooling like the typical young adult. I did the European way, which is exploring life, and then I decided to get serious about things. And so what I did is I got my associate's degree in science through a little community college. And during that time, I actually wanted to be, and I know you guys have heard this a lot, I wanted to be an English teacher in Japan. That was like the first thing I wanted to do. And a massage therapist for a period of time. And then I took an anatomy and physiology course, and I just really loved it. And I loved it because I hated it early on, and I just didn't want to do it. And then I got really behind, and I was like, okay, I got to do this. So I started studying, and I came to understand that I actually really loved this. And then I did really well. And then from then on, my schooling just kind of unfolded itself. So I went to Northern Arizona University and got a dual major in biology and chemistry. And then I went to medical school in the Caribbean. And you say, why did he go to the Caribbean? Because it was easy. Because you have choices and you have tons of applications. And my wife and I said, hey, let's just take the money and avoid the applications. We're already in, let's do it. So we went to the Caribbean. Went through a hurricane. That was a really pleasant experience. And then after that, came back to the United States, and I went to chiropractic school. And I spent a year in chiropractic school, and that's where I learned about naturopathic medicine. And it was the principles of naturopathic medicine that actually drew me to this profession. And those 6 principles are, the first one, that actually, in 2019, the British, medical journal put out a article on do no harm, and basically said, you can't ever not do harm. And you guys, this is ridiculous. Hippocrates didn't say that. And so they kind of backed off the idea of do no harm. I think the naturopaths got it right. So I still love the idea of, above all, do no harm. And as well, the goal is you want to dig in and find the root of the diseases. That can be quite the ordeal. We don't always know what those are. And so we dig as deep as we can, and we do as much as we can deeper in so that we can treat the whole tree rather than just fix a branch. And so you want to treat the whole person. I've discussed that a little bit, which is all those different aspects of who that person is. And it takes a lot more time to explore that and know that. And then what I love about naturopathic medicine is we recognize that we're not alone on this planet as human beings. We're surrounded by so much life, and that life is the same environment that we are in, and that we can utilize that life as our medicine, and we basically rely on each other. The trees, air that I breathe in, they pick up and breathe in when I breathe out. And I think that's very beautiful, and I think that nature is very healing for us. Even just going into the forest can be very healing. And using, herbal medicine, which is a core of what I do, is a big part of it. The physician as teacher, docere, doctor, actually translates as teacher, and that's important that we educate. Because if you educate, people can learn to fish and do things right. Otherwise, they don't. And the final one, which actually, a lot of people don't know this, but the prevention one is in the oath that every physician takes. And I'm MD, DO, they all say it's better to prevent than to cure. And an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that is a true old saying. So what is Mederi Care? And Donnie Yance, who was the founder of Mederi Care, he would describe it as the eclectic triphasic medical system. That's what he originally called it. But he recognized that the way things were didn't work. In other words, example, an Ayurvedic practitioner has a very difficult time explaining to a Western herbalism practitioner exactly what herbs they're using and how they work and how they do it. And so the goal is to come up with a unified approach. And that was kind of the idea behind Mederi Care. And so that's this idea is we use science-based, but we want to do whole systems, but we want to use the whole person and create something that uses traditional and modern medicine. So the 3 branches, which is kind of one of the core things of Mederi Care, are external, internal, right, and the combination of both. So we have the host, the person, the microenvironment, and the landscape that all are important to take into account, but also the dis-ease process that is going on. And that's that triphasic system. And these are our primary toolboxes that we're utilizing. So what I love about what Donnie did with Mederi Care is he said, okay, here's the toolboxes that we use. And here's kind of what we use more than others. And like, this is where he focused. And I think it's very important to recognize that these are more root medicine approaches. In other words, we're going to look at the diet. We're going to look at what supplements you need to supplement into that diet, because you may not be getting everything dietarily. We're going to look at your lifestyle. We're going to use pharmaceuticals when it's appropriate, because there are times when it is very appropriate to use a pharmaceutical. And the key, which I call the mainstay of it, is botanical medicine. I use a lot of herbs. And then at the center of it is the heart-based medicine that I think is the most important aspect, and it keeps it all together. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that one of the most important things that a physician can bring to a patient-physician relationship is that they care about the person in front of them. If they care, they're going to do well. All right. These are the 9 natural laws of human health. These are arbitrary. These are what I came up with. I like to give everyone a baseline of everything before I jump into the, the topic. And so these are really straightforward. Rest, exercise, right? Movement. Now you think electromagnetism, that refers to sunlight and a lot of different electromagnetic frequencies that affect us. Air, fresh air, making sure you're drinking enough water, clean water, making sure that you're getting the right foods in, the right nutrition, making sure that what we do, and this is really important to me, because this is the old way of seeing things. This is the new way of seeing things. So Bruce Lipton, if you're familiar with him, talks a lot about how our genes are not who we are, that we can change those genes. They express themselves based upon our environment and upon our choices. And so, like I've said many times, and I take this from Wayne Dyer, is, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And that's very important. You want to understand the mind and the emotion and the spirit, and you want to be able to balance that part of yourselves. I learned this actually personally, the hard way, because I wasn't doing that. And I was focusing on all these other, maybe mind, but there's more to that. And what I realized is that once I started bettering myself on a spiritual and on an inspirational level, it made a big difference in my life. And then, of course, our social interactions. Now, there are 2 things that are considered the most important things to live a long and healthy life. Most doctors would agree with this, and the evidence is bearing it out. And that is, 1, good social interactions in your life. And 2 is exercise, movement. For some reason, those 2 things, now sleep's important, all the other stuff here is a core, right? But those 2 things seem to be the biggest predictors. So when we're talking about the type of healthcare I'm referring to, we're talking about a wellness mindset. We're talking about not just prevention, but we're talking about treatment that aims at wellness rather than covering up the symptom. And so this is damage control. This is proactively creating and preventing, disease and creating health. And that is the greatest component of all things, is our mindset in terms of living a long quality life. All right. So what is fasting? This is not fasting. So fasting doesn't mean eating fast food, okay? I get a kick out of that. So the meaning is actually derived from an old English word, but even before that, in Sanskrit, they use this word upavasa, which means near to God, and is still practiced and used as abstaining from food in Hinduism. And so in Old English, it meant to hold strongly to abstaining from food. In other words, you fastened on and you used your will to abstain from food. Now, I like to make the point that it is different than starvation, because that's commonly, I think, intermixed. And that is, starvation is an involuntary act. That's how I describe that. If you're starving, likely you're not voluntarily starving. If you're voluntarily starving, you're fasting. And this picture paints 1,000 words. So, so I think it's great. So basically, it's all mindset. And he can choose which way he's going to go. Either way, you're not eating. So let's talk a little bit about the history of fasting. So this is actually a quote from Plato. He said, "I fast for greater physical and mental efficiency." And this was actually commonly used in the early Greeks. Like, they used fasting as part of their medicine. Hippocrates, the one who came up with do no harm, he actually used to prescribe fasting quite frequently, and apple cider vinegar. He was a big advocate for that. So those two things. And interestingly enough, even Pythagoras, before he did his exams, did a 40-day fast. So you can learn some interesting things. Like, this was very popular back then, and people recognized just from experience the effects that fasting had on them. And so we're going to go into a lot of those effects. But first, I'm going to dive into a little bit more about the history of fasting from the spiritual side of things, from the religious side. And so I wanted to just focus on the main religions. And I'm just going to pull a quote from each and describe, some of the fasting traditions that are there. That's all we're doing. And so these were the, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, the major religions of the world. And each one of these has their own fasting tradition. And so Catholicism, they have 2 days a year that they typically fast. And generally that is during Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. And interestingly enough, I think that there is during Lent, there is supposed to be some abstaining, I believe, as well from food during that time. And again, I'm not Catholic, so if you have something you want to chime in, don't hesitate. So the other side of this too is that many of the Christian religions, even under that, still utilize fasting as a big part of their religious experience. And I think that there are many references to that in the Bible, which I think is pretty neat too. And so in Islam as well, Muhammad was a big advocate for fasting, and Ramadan is a big time of fasting from sunset, right? Or from sunrise to sunset, correct? And Hinduism, they do it quite frequently. In fact, it depends on which one of the gods that your guru typically leads you towards, and they will fast during that time quite frequently. And there's different forms of fasting, which is very interesting. They don't just do it from food. They can do it from water. They can do, one of the big ones that's commonly practiced in India is just avoiding meat in all form. And not just being vegetarian all the time, but just fasting from meat for a few days. And in Buddhism, most of the monks in Buddhism are not only vegetarian, but they typically don't eat after noon. So from noon until the following morning for breakfast, they don't eat. And that's very common practice. And so there's just so many examples throughout the religious systems. And I think this is a great example from the Bible, where Jesus says, tries to cast out a demon and says, "Oh, don't worry, you couldn't do it because you have to be using prayer and fasting." I think it's pretty neat. Muhammad says, "He gives up his food, drink, and desire for my sake. Fasting is for me, and I will reward for it, and a good deed receives a reward of 10 like it." This is Rumi. I think this is a great quote. Fasting is the first principle of medicine. Fast and see the strength of the spirit reveal itself. If physical fasting is not accompanied by mental fasting, it is bound to end in hypocrisy and disaster. Mahatma Gandhi. And Gandhi did quite a few fasts over the years as a way to basically get change to happen. And I believe his longest fast was, I can't recall, it was like 20 days or something. It was not as long as some of the long, really long fasts, but he did them frequently. And that really makes a difference. I do not eat in the evening, and thus am free from illness and affliction, and enjoy health, strength, and ease. And that's the Buddha. And actually, interestingly enough, early on, Siddhartha Gautama, I think that's how you say it. I don't say it right, probably. And so the Buddha would, early on, advocate for people to fast and to withhold themselves from food for short periods of time. And then he eventually had the monks start doing that too. So it was a very important part, I think, of allowing himself to become in contact with himself, taking away from what I would call the desires that we can have. That's like a base desire. We want food, right? And overcoming that with our will, and in a sense, overcoming our body, which I think is pretty cool. Isaiah, this is part of the Judaism component. And this is a cool scripture too, I thought, from the Bible. It says, no, this is the fast I desire, to unlock the, I can't see that very well, fetters of wickedness, and you untie the cords of the yoke to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. And then that's the type of fast that he wants, is to share your bread with the hungry and to take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, to clothe them and to not ignore your own kin. And so that's another thing about fasting, is we withdraw from something that we may take in a lot into ourselves, and when we have that extra, we can give to others, which I think is another cool aspect that a lot of us probably don't think about. So this I thought was a great breakdown of the 7 spiritual benefits of building a fasting practice. So fasting can help you to cleanse your soul. It unifies your soul. That's a description I've heard. Fasting can create a new desire to commune with a higher power. And that might be because you're feeling so bad. Sometimes that is the truth. Sometimes it's when we're at our lowest, right? So fasting helps you appreciate your body that much more. Fasting provides you a time to think and pray, and that's a very true thing. How much of our time is taken just eating and consuming? It's interesting. And fasting can foster a new sense of satisfaction. It's having that willpower to overcome something is pretty powerful too. It suppresses our personal desires and elevates our awareness of God's desires. And spiritually, fasting allows us to find peace, stability, and strength no matter the circumstances. I remember my 10th day on the Master Cleanse very well, very, very well. And I felt so calm. I remember that calmness, like it's the clarity of doing that. And that's not really fasting, but it is abstaining from food. You're drinking lemonade all the time. So this is the main reasons I love fasting. And these are the physiological benefits of fasting. So weight loss does occur. You avoid things that can be causing digestion problems. You increase your insulin sensitivity. You slow down the aging process. You boost the immune system. You increase your growth hormone, which helps with tremendous aspects of who we are physiologically. Reduces inflammation and increases our focus. Fasting has actually become very popular in Silicon Valley. It's become kind of a fad there to do certain fasting periods. And the reason that is because it helps them focus and code better. So let's start with weight loss as a side of it. And this is going to kind of meld in together. So there's this thought process regarding caloric reduction. So if you were to go to your physician or nutritionist or your physical therapist, there's many different labels I can give here. Most of them are going to tell you to do a caloric reduction. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it doesn't tend to work long term. And the reason that is because you'll notice here, and I love this, this is with intermittent fasting and caloric reduction, and you can see the insulin levels, right, with caloric reduction. And you can see the insulin levels over time with intermittent fasting. And this is, if you look at the months here, after about 6 months, the insulin levels drop a lot. And I'm going to explain that to you as we go on here. I'll talk a little bit about insulin and other things. Who remembers this show? So, anyone watch it? How many of you actually watch the show? I have seen parts of it. I never watched the whole, like a whole episode, but I knew that they were mostly exercising the whole time, and they all looked very, very unhappy. And so, but what's interesting is at the end they lose all this weight, and there was this big study that was done where they went back and they looked at all of the people who went through this and lost all that weight. And the reason that they never have a reunion show is because, and this is a quote directly from one of the contestants, everyone gains the weight back again. And so why is that? Why does caloric, so what they do is they basically reduce calories and they exercise like crazy. That's the goal of this dietary approach, which has been shown it will help you lose weight. There's no doubt. But unfortunately, it's not the right path for long-term weight loss. So this is the one-step model that is based on, okay? The kitchen sink is our body. The calories go in, the body uses them, we exercise, and the calories go out, right? And so that doesn't really work. How many of you have done a caloric, like just count your calories and done that? So were you successful with it? No, most people aren't. And there's a reason for that physiologically, and I'll explain that. This is the two-compartment model. And so before I go on, I just want to say that a lot of this information that I'm bringing here comes from Jason Fung. He's an MD. He wrote the obesity code. Very, very intelligent man. I rely a lot on his work because he just pulls from so many different things and compiles great explanations of those things. So if you want to go really deep into fasting and learn even more, I highly recommend looking into Jason Fung, F-U-N-G. He's great. So this is our liver, okay? This is our liver, the refrigerator. And this is our fat, okay, the body fat. These are and if you think of them, this is a great way to think of it. These are kind of like our storage facility. So if you were to put the ice chest downstairs in the basement, right? Well, you're probably going to go to the fridge most of the time. And sometimes you'll go downstairs and you'll pull some of the stuff out of the ice chest. The liver will constantly have glycogen available. In other words, we'll constantly have stored form of sugar available to use for energy as long as that liver has it and is producing it and is full of it, okay? So if you empty the refrigerator, in other words, the liver doesn't have any glycogen stores left, well, the body has to receive energy from somewhere. And as human beings, we've done this for a very, very long time. Our ancestors didn't always have food available like we do today. One of the biggest diseases that we face today as Americans, right, in the United States, is that we have a caloric excess. We always have a caloric excess. It's available to almost everyone, very easily available. And so the goal is you want to not just decrease the amount of calories going in, because if you decrease the calories going in, there's still going to be some production of glycogen being made. It's still going to store it, because even if you exercise really hard, what happens is your body says, you know what? I don't like this. I'm having to work really hard to make energy for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to do one of two things. You're going to exercise like crazy to meet that demand, but we're going to actually either make you really hungry so that you increase your desire to eat, which is a big thing about caloric reduction. Because the insulin levels stay higher, the ghrelin level can jump. And so what happens is we become very hungry during that, and we tend to eat more. And so, unfortunately, that does happen. The other thing that happens is our metabolism slows down. Now, think about that for a moment. So if your metabolism, so if you reduce your caloric intake by 30%, and then at the same time you reduce your metabolism by 30%, you're not really getting anywhere, right? Because you adapt. Now it does work over time. You just have to put out more and more exercise. And one of the great things about The Biggest Loser is they exercise nonstop. So it works. They just keep pushing through it, and they're hungry all the time. But when they're done, they're ravenous, and none of them stick to it. And so I think that's a big important aspect of this. Now, I also want to point out that these are generalizations. Every person is an individual. And as an individual, that can be different for you. In other words, you can have different appetites. Your ghrelin response, your insulin response can all be different. And I can tell you that I have done a lot of genetic testing on people, and I've seen people with SNPs, like multiple of them, where they don't have very good hunger control at all. Just they're genetically very low hunger control. And so it's interesting that as the information grows, we learn a lot, and the individual is different than the whole. So the idea behind fasting is when the liver doesn't have anything more to give us, then we go to the freezers. And so we start using, so from a weight loss perspective, that's what happens there, okay? So I'm not just focusing on weight loss, because there's a lot of other benefits. So this is probably the most important slide, in my opinion, of the things that I put up. So if you want to understand what happens when you fast, this is a great description of it. So within the first 4 to 6 hours, you're going to use up the sugar that you took in, right? And at some point, you're going to say, I am really hungry. and now it's time to eat again. It's lunchtime, right? And so in that period of time, if you don't take anything in, you're going to start burning your glycogen from the liver. Now, this can take 12 to 24 hours, depending on your body and how much glycogen store you have, to use up the glycogen in your liver. And so as you use it up, then you shift over to burning fat. And burning fat is called ketosis. That's where we use ketones for our energy. And basically what happens is all of these wonderful things occur. So think about this for a moment. If you were to be 200 years ago, right, and you're out hunting, and you need to get your food, right? You're out on the ranch, you need to get your food, and you don't have any food left. You've used up, maybe you have some hardtack, and you've used up your hardtack, and you basically have no food left, but you still need to hunt, right? Well, the body is going to figure out a way to make it so you can still hunt. One of the ways it does that is through this process. So it actually helps you increase epinephrine, so you get more energy, and it's like this burst that just makes you go and go. And you start burning your fat, any fat stores it can pull from. And even when you use up your fat stores, your body will still break down protein. In other words, your body wants you to live and survive. And epinephrine is one of the key factors of metabolism. In other words, when you're using epinephrine, your metabolism is actually increasing a bit. And so your inflammation starts to decrease. Everything's access. This is just fantastic. Your insulin drops really low. And this little guy right here is a big, big component. Autophagy begins. So this is why I love the alternate day fasting for me, because by the time I hit that 24-hour period, now I knew I was in autophagy and my body was doing cellular cleanup. And so as you go on here, as the days go on, you actually increase more of the fat burning. It peaks. You start to see growth hormone spikes go up, and you certain pathways, which I'm going to talk about, get inhibited. And then when you get around 48 to 72 hours, you drop into an even deeper cleansing mode. And your body does tremendous things, not only to keep you alive, but to keep you healthy. So fasting is kind of nature's way for us to heal. It's a fantastic thing to do. And so I want to talk a little bit about ghrelin. So ghrelin is one of the biggest difficulties that people face when they fast. So ghrelin is the hunger hormone. When ghrelin gets released, I always remember it as grr, right? Like Tony the Tiger, right? You're gonna grumble. And I love this graph because it shows us what happens. Ghrelin comes in waves. So when you get hungry, you'll get this big release of ghrelin, and you're gonna get hungry. But if you ignore it, and you just suffer through it, drink some water, it'll calm down, and you won't feel hungry anymore. And then a little bit later, it'll spike again. And over time, you'll notice that these are in 4-hour increments, okay? You'll notice that the ghrelin level becomes less, and the time between those spikes becomes more. And then at the end, you get a big spike. This always happens on my alternate day. At the end of the day, I'm like, I'm hungry. And so, but it's still a lot less than that original spike. So this is another great example, but this goes beyond the 4-hour increments. This goes into fasting time in hours, but you can see over days how it decreases. So your hunger response decreases over time. This is the best example of insulin. Listen, I could show you this picture and everyone here now understands how insulin works. So basically, insulin is pushing the glucose into the cells, okay? They should have marked this as cell. And what happens when you take the glucose away, right? So you start fasting and you take all of these people away. Well, pretty soon the train moves on and it needs more people to be filling it. Pretty soon, these guys, the insulin, aren't as active, and they're like, well, I guess we don't need 2 of us anymore. Now there's just 1, and maybe, they just come in shifts. So the goal is, by removal, you can become more insulin sensitive, and I think that's very, very important for our health. And for I guess the way to think of it is, if you can imagine your cell constantly being covered in glucose all the time, if you don't take that away for a while and allow all that stickiness to get cleaned up, right, then it's always going to be gunked up. You can't if this is how the cells always are, when are you going to go in and clean the cell? The train is going to be a very dirty train. So autophagy, this is a great, just quick picture of what happens with autophagy. So autophagy just means eating, right? Auto-eating. And so the idea is that you create this little phagosphere, it actually engulfs cellular components, then a lysosome comes along and fuses with it, and you degrade it. And then those pieces get used to make other things in your cells, which is very important. This is one of the key components. This and the sirtuin pathway are very, very important. mTOR and AMPK, but they're all interconnected. mTOR, which I'm going to talk about here, is the mammalian target of rapamycin. And I bring this guy up a lot because it's not only important in fasting, it's also important in recognizing growth in our body. So in other words, you need both. You need to be growing, but you also need to be cellular cleanup. You need that train to be busy, but you also need to be able to go in and clean the train. And so mTOR is kind of like the regulating system of that. The name mTOR actually comes, and I'll just briefly say this, from Easter Island. They discovered a bacteria, and that bacteria on the island actually produced this chemical. And they took the chemical and they put it in petri dishes and they said, what is this doing? It's binding to something we've never seen bound to before. And they discovered this new receptor, and the name of the chemical, they named it rapamycin, and they named the receptor the mammalian target of rapamycin. So super original. But this is what it does. All of these different things feed in and they make mTOR active. And you get growth and hyperfunction, and if it's always functioning, you get diseases of aging that worsen and worsen. And so if you inhibit mTOR, which take those things away, or use rapamycin and proper dosing, or other herbs, you can actually shut off that pathway. And you can extend life, which is pretty incredible, and you can do autophagy and get cleanup. The sirtuin pathway primarily refers to NAD and refers to the use of energy in our cells. And this pathway is very important for that. It's a big component. And I shared this recently, but I just love this so much. Whoever Dr. Jockers is, he did a great job with that. The thing that I'm focused on for this is this aspect right here, but all of these things can actually push that pathway. So the mTOR pathway you want inhibited, the sirtuin pathway you want active. So when the sirtuin pathway is active, you actually get all of those benefits. And that's because your cells are functioning better, right? NAD creates more ATP, which means we have better energy production, and the train can move better. Everything moves better. So I want to review this real quick. So, and this is more in the medical terminology way. So the brain, when you are fasting, your brain actually produces, after typically around 24 to 42 hours in that time frame, you start to produce really high levels of something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Fasting is one of the best ways to increase that. Exercise does it too. And brain-derived neurotrophic factor actually helps us to build neurons, and it helps our neurons function better. And so there are medications you can do to do that, but fasting is one of the best ways to do that without doing anything, literally. You avoid doing something. And you can see all of these amazing things that occur with fasting. Blood pressure drops, insulin sensitivity, fatty acid mobilization, reduced inflammation, cellular cleanup, cholesterol levels improve, and you increase your parasympathetic tone, which makes you calmer. Which is interesting because your norepinephrine levels go up. So that boosts up your metabolism and would make most people feel like stressed, right? But at the same time, and that happens more and more over time, your epinephrine levels increase. So there comes a point where sleep can get kind of difficult when you're fasting for extended periods of time. That's very commonly recognized. But at the same time, you're actually improving the brain function and you're increasing your ability to be calm and relaxed. And so it's a very unique thing to have the energy present and metabolism present, but at the same time be in that rest and digest mode. It's interesting. So what are some of the risks of fasting? So generally speaking, the biggest side effect I see with fasting is headaches. And then this is the one that almost everyone talks about. This is being hangry. That's what we call that. And then you can get tired. And then over time, you start to actually become like less fatigued. Sometimes constipation happens. This is an issue with not getting enough fluids in and electrolytes. So that's an important aspect. When you're doing a fast, you need to make sure that you understand you will be losing electrolytes. So depending on your method that you choose, you want to replace those electrolytes. This is a big problem too. So if you fast for a while, a lot of times you just get so sad that you need to eat again. And you miss eating so much that when you go back to it, you eat too much. And of course, your hunger level, depending on the time frame of your fasting, can be different. So that's where it's very important. So the cool thing about fasting, though, everyone heard the phrase where they say your stomach shrunk. Your stomach doesn't actually shrink. It doesn't actually happen. But what's interesting enough is that you become more sensitive to the amount of food in your stomach. So now it feels fuller easier. So a lot of times people will try to overeat after they've fasted for an extended period of time, and they find that it's quite difficult to do. So this is an interesting one that a lot of people are not aware of. But when you do fast, it does kick up those liver enzymes that will make it so that you become very alcohol intolerant, is the better way to say it. So, because your liver enzymes are helping your body cleanse too. So, now the fasting approaches. So when we're talking about fasting approaches, we're primarily talking about either intermittent fasting, which is time-restricted feeding, alternate day fasting, or kind of our typical pattern where we fast little bits between meals, right? And I love this because you can look at this and you can see what happens to our glucose levels consistently throughout that time when we eat. But you'll notice with alternate day fasting, you get this long time period between, and your insulin levels drop and you get that cleanup. And then this pops up. This also works with something called 5-2, which we're going to discuss. And then this one here, this time-restricted eating, which a lot of people do. This is like you do an 18-hour fast or a 16-hour fast. The idea is you're going to get those bumps during that time, and your ketone production is just not as good. But it is still a good fast. It's just different. So this is probably the most common one that I recommend to people. It really depends on the person, but most people have a hard time like not eating at all. And I think it's very important to do that because I think generally speaking you want to try to get a full 24-hour fast, like 36 hours ideally, at least once a month, at least. And you'll get that autophagy, which helps clean up and heal a lot of things. But the 24 method, basically the idea is you keep this little 4-hour block, and a lot of people will do it between 2 to 6. I prefer this time frame because if you go too late, then it typically isn't as good because you're sleeping with a full stomach and the digestion gets affected. And so you really want to try to give some time to digest before you sleep. And so this is kind of the idea. Some people do eat a little bit during this time. They'll only eat like a few vegetables or like an apple or something, maybe some berries. But I really don't think that this is really necessary. I think water only with either like coffee with nothing added, clean, like organic. Ideally, you can get some of the base like low pH, high. What am I thinking here? So if you're acidic, you're going to be, what's that?
You want more alkaline.
Yeah, you want it to be alkaline. So you want alkaline. My brain is not thinking of the pH right now. So I could think of all these logarithms and what it's doing. Yeah, so your high pH is more basic and then low pH is more acidic. My brain is just dead. So basically, yeah, I'm tired. So the idea here is you want to do that method where you can bring things in that are extremely low calorie like that, but you don't want to necessarily throw off your pH really bad and become too acidic. That can cause problems too. Oh, one thing that I didn't mention as a side effect is if you don't get enough fluid, you can have kidney stones. So that's important to recognize. So water is very important when you're fasting. So this is probably the most popular one out there. And I hear a lot of people bring this one up. What I've seen with this is not a lot of weight loss. I've seen people who do this type of dietary approach typically don't lose much weight, they just maintain. That's what I've seen mostly. And most of the time they just end up eating a bunch more during that time frame and they really didn't diet at all. This is one of my favorite approaches. This and the alternate day are my two favorites. This one is nice because for a lot of people, they can eat normally. You try to eat a very healthful diet with what you're eating. And then on one day a week, after 2 days of fasting, you'll fast, right? In this sense, you're doing 2 days, fast. 3 days, fast. And the idea is you alternate consistently through that 5-2 approach. And so I have found that doing this approach tends to work pretty well for people, similarly to the alternate day fasting. And as long as you're able to control yourself on the days that you eat, meaning that you're eating healthful during those days, it does really well. And this is to make it more survivable for people, but again, I'll say this is to give you an idea of what you can do and still get benefits. But ideally, this is a water-only fast. And you get your electrolytes and other things like on eating days. So doing a full day, about 36 hours of fasting, goes through all of those phases that I described to you, except for the 42 to 72, like the 48 to 72 hour one, right? Which was a major deep cleaning. And that's why occasionally you want to do a 3-day water-only fast. And for a lot of people, they'll do one of those. A lot of my patients, I'll have them try to do at least a couple days per month. And every 3 months, do at least a 3-day one. So it's like a 90-day, you do the 3 days. And this is alternate day. And this is my favorite one, right up there with the other one. But this one I love because really the goal is, it's so simple. You just switch every day. And this is how I experienced it when I did it. I did this for about 6 months. It worked amazing for me. I felt great. And what I noticed is that by the time I was like done with my fasting day, I was starving. Like I was like, I'm ready to eat. And then I'd go to sleep, and I'd wake up the next morning, and I'd enjoy that day to its fullest, right? And then by nighttime, I would say, you know what, I never want to eat again because I ate too much. And then the following day, I'm fasting. So I love this approach. It works so well for me, not for everyone. Typically, by day, you do really well by like day 3 of the fast, like your third fasting day is usually going to be the hardest for most people. That's what I've seen. I've had a lot of cancer patients do this. I had a great response with a kidney cancer patient whose cancer like just completely disappeared, all because he was doing this, and I know this was the core of it. So it was pretty amazing. So I don't like to make those statements that say this was the only thing, because he was doing other things. But I do know this was a big component because this is what changed. This is what changed, and this is what made his cancer disappear. So autophagy works. So let me give you a few rules on this too. Okay, they make some packets, these electrolyte packets. I brought one actually with me just to kind of show you. These are the Jigsaw Health electrolyte packets. They're typically really good. They don't have any sugar in them. And they have your salt and your other electrolytes, your potassium, your calcium. And so it makes sure you get those electrolytes that you're going to urinate out when you go into ketosis. So you're going to decrease. The first thing you lose when you fast is water weight because you start moving water off. So it's important you drink a lot more water because, believe it or not, you actually get a lot of water in your food. A lot of water in your food. And not everyone is completely aware of that. So you have to make up for the water you're missing from your food. And so on your fasting day, it's water only and no electrolytes on your fasting day. Some people do, but I prefer to do those on your eating days. And then you can have coffee or tea, but no additives to them. And I try to limit it, right? But it's nice. If you're really hungry and you just need something, you can drink a cup of coffee. And so, or a cup of tea, herbal tea or others. Just don't get something that's super sugary. So I also wanted to talk about this a little bit. So a lot of people, the keto diet, the ketogenic diet has become a bit of a fad over the last little while. And I can tell you from personal experience, it's a great diet in the short term. It is not a good diet in the long term. It's not healthy. It really isn't. So the way that it works is that you avoid all of these things that have so many healthy benefits that are filled with polyphenols and antioxidants and all these really healthful things for you. You're just going to basically not eat them much anymore. You're going to kick them to the side. Then you're going to get a good amount of protein, but almost all fat. And that is the ketogenic diet. Where did this diet come from? Does anyone know the answer to this? Let's hear it. No, actually, that's a good thought. I don't know if Hippocrates used the ketogenic diet, but he may have done something similar at times.
He developed a similar diet. It was mainly fat-based for epilepsy.
I think, yes. So he mentioned it, I believe. And so we don't really know what the diet was. We understand it a little bit. But it was actually another physician who came along and said, you know what, kids, we have this whole natural method of being able to stop people from having, these epileptic seizures. And the only way that we're going to be able to get people to do it is if they're still able to eat, especially children. And so the idea was, hey, they can have this type of diet and they can still fill their bellies with stuff that they love, but we're going to decrease their seizures. And so it was a risk-benefit analysis that determined the use of the ketogenic diet. And yeah, it does work for weight loss, better for men actually than it does for women. That's what the studies have shown. And alternate day fasting actually works better for women than it does for men. Both are, and you're talking about weight loss, just something interesting to know. And that can be different for everyone, but those are generalizations. But the idea here is the ketogenic diet was a therapeutic diet, and there are times where it's a good diet in the short term. This one's very close to me. I had a friend and I've used the ketogenic diet. I've used it for diabetics. It's actually worked very well. I've taken many people off their metformin and their insulin, and it's worked. The problem is that you do it long term, they're going to have heart problems. Almost always cardiovascular issues start to happen. And I've seen it. So whatever anyone else tells you, I've seen it too many times, and at the same time, I've also experienced it with a friend of mine, close friend, who is diabetic, and he basically decided to do this. And I told him after he'd done it for a while, I said, okay, now it's time to really get on the healthful, fruits and vegetables and make changes and do it right. And he just didn't want to stop. He liked eating the meat. And so unfortunately, he passed away from a heart attack. So
Too much fat.
Weight, it's not just the fat, the fat's a big part of it. I don't want to just point to the fat, because fat's important for us. But proteins too. You're basically constantly pushing those growth pathways, and believe it or not, mTOR is actually more reliant on the branched chain amino acids for pushing those growth pathways than glucose, even though we focus on the glucose. So what you eat still matters. I love this slide because it's very simple and it makes things very simple. 2 servings of fruit, basically moderate size servings. So like a fist-sized serving of fruit twice a day, and 3 fist-sized servings of veggies. Now, it gives you some examples of how much that is on here in a serving, right? So I'm not against juice. I don't really like concentrated juices. I think they're not super great for you. But, vegetable juices, they can be beneficial. So it's just you don't want to juice too much because it's very concentrated. This is a great option for people. So I love this. So people who just don't get in their fruits and vegetables like they should, this is kind of a greens powder that I've used a lot. And I find this to be, it tastes good. This was one of the few greens powders I could drink and it didn't make my gut upset. So that's very individualized, but I've seen this work for a lot of patients too. The reason I bring this up, and I put this as doing 3 caps on the non-fasting days with food, is this is going to help your body in so many different ways. I just want everyone the reason they call it botanical treasures is that's exactly what it is. It is a treasure. It's the green tea, the turmeric, the trans-resveratrol, and I don't know if you guys are paying attention to things, but there's a lot of research coming out on these things, and we're learning a lot about how beneficial these are for our health. So if you're looking to make sure that you're getting enough of these in, taking a few caps of these on your non-fasting days is very helpful. IG sensitizer, this is for people who have glucose issues. Okay, I'm going to put that out there. For people who are insulin resistant, this is one of the best things for that. Bitter melon, it gives you specific nutrients that help those pathways function better. And gymnema, which is also very helpful, and berberine, which I feel is the best replacement for metformin. It's very, very beneficial. And you just do 1 cap with each meal. 2 caps if it's worse. And then I like to give at least one of the drug pathways on here, and this is rapamycin and metformin. Now, I prefer berberine over metformin for many reasons. Metformin is actually from an herb. So metformin was isolated from an herb originally. So it's still kind of a good product in some aspects, but people who are on metformin typically become resistant to metformin eventually, and then they have to change things up. So I feel like berberine just tends to work better down that pathway. But when we're talking about inducing a fasting state in the body, rapamycin does that by inhibiting mTOR. And metformin works on a different pathway by blocking this AMPK pathway. And so you get these different benefits that actually decrease oxidative damage and improve autophagy and slow cellular growth. So rapamycin is used for transplant patients. Okay, so get an idea of that. When you take rapamycin daily, you're suppressing the immune function because it hits 2 paths of the mTOR system. But if you take rapamycin once every 7 to 10 days, the dose is the poison, you can actually get all the benefits without the negative effects. And the reason you add in berberine or metformin is because because you're blocking this pathway, it can make this back up a little bit. So you want to make sure that the glucose pathway is well managed too. And if you do both of those, it's pretty effective combination for age management, for inducing a fasting state, but drugs, just do the fasting. Willpower is better. So I like to leave some reasons just very quickly of why it's a good idea to come see me prior to fasting, because everyone's an individual and there's a lot of things we need to look at to determine what the best option is for you. And so I like to run some tests and make sure it's safe and all those things doctors do. And then we can put together an individualized dietary plan on the non-fasting days. Maybe you have more sensitivities, so we can come up with options for that, right? And so the idea is you're able to create a plan that works better for you. But it doesn't mean, I don't want that to inhibit you from doing it because I still think anyone can fast. And you don't need to see your doctor to fast. You just have to be self-aware. So now I want to show you the journal. Is it possible to bring that up? So there are many benefits to journaling. And the reason I'm sharing this journal with you guys is because this journal gives a really great way of helping you adhere to a goal of fasting. And I've had difficulties with that, and I think that this is a good way to help overcome some of those difficulties. So the way the journal works is first you're going to get kind of a plan. You can map out your plan of how you're going to fast, what your fasting days are, when they're not. This is month 1. And then you do journaling every day. And if you can kind of scroll up, I'll show you on the page. Yeah. So you'll see it gives you these great measurements that you can track for your health, as well as kind of how you're feeling and the progress that you're making. And if you go to the next page down here, you can set your goals. And I think this is a great way to do it. It gives you little, tidbits of helpful motivation on that path to doing it. And really importantly, you can track your water intake because it's very important when you're fasting. And so does anyone know how much water you should be drinking in a day normally? The general rules.
Like 50% of your body weight.
But they changed it recently.
Okay, so here's the answer. It doesn't actually exist. There is no. So the answer is we all have different ideas though about it, right? Everyone's heard different things. But the general rule is half your body weight in ounces per day of water is what people say. So if you're 100 pounds, right, then you want to get at least 50 ounces per day. I can tell you that rule does not work. I've given it to many people. So that's a general rule. So the idea is you want to make sure you're getting plenty of fluid in, and you'll know. Because if you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated. You're starting to become dehydrated. So listen to your body. Make sure you're intaking water. And I really love lemon in water right now. It's fantastic. It'll help you to decrease the possibility of a kidney stone, and it gives you potassium, and it helps kind of with digestion in general. So I'm a big fan of just adding some lemon in the water. All right, so thank you all for coming. Now I'm going to open it up for questions. Is there anything else? Thank you. So, any questions or anything on this?
So on the days that you're fasting, or if you're eating, only the 500 calories, what does the exercise on those days look like? If you're not
Okay,
putting
so
any
my
calories in?
general rule about exercise is that you want to adapt to the diet before you adapt to something else. So if you're doing two things at once, be a little careful, because it's going to be hard on your body to adapt to both. Generally, you want to try to do 30 days of the fast consistently. So if you're doing alternate day fasting, be really consistent for about 30 days, and then build your exercise up. You can exercise on fasting days, absolutely. But again, you need to be self-aware. So you have to pay attention to your body. I notice when I exercise on fasting days, I'm a little bit weaker than on days that I eat, just a little bit. You actually don't break down a lot of protein. There's been a lot of studies to show that the protein breakdown is very minimal. So a lot of people worry about muscle loss, and that really doesn't happen. You have to get pretty thin to get to that point. So I really like the alternate day fasting as a starting point, and then shifting over to like a 24 or a 16/8, which fits with you longer, and then bringing in like once a week where you do like a day to get the deeper autophagy, and then once a month to 3 months where you do like 3 days. That's kind of the ideal to me. So it's adapting appropriately to what your body can handle and need and do.
Do you find a difference? I've found that many people in their water intake really need the water earlier in the morning.
Oh, yes, 100%.
So
Yeah.
that's I think of it as a deep watering.
Mm-hmm.
And people where the stomach gets involved and kidneys get involved. So
I agree with that completely. In fact, I do recommend that, and to a lot of my patients too. I tell them when you wake up first thing in the morning, if any of you have seen me, you know, I tell you, I almost tell everyone, drink a big glass of water when you wake up. And the reason that is because it's better to get in a lot of your fluid earlier in the day, and this is the main reason why. Because I want your sleep to be really good. Because if you sleep well through the night, you're going to heal better, and you're going to get healthier. If you don't sleep well through the night, you're not going to heal as well. And if you're getting up to urinate multiple times, your sleep gets disrupted. So that's a big component for me. But I agree, morning is way better. Mm-hmm.
do you find any difference in the temperature of the water?
Yeah, so I used to drink ice water, but I don't anymore. And I don't think it's necessarily like a really bad thing. It's better to be hydrated than not hydrated. But yeah, you want to do your body has to use energy to warm that water up, right? Because it's got to cleave those little water molecules to create ATP. And so and it has to absorb it. And all of that works better when the temperature's there. Any chemical reaction works better at certain temperatures. And cold temperature typically inhibits or slows reactions. So it's pretty simple. Yeah. So totally agree with that.
So you said you can have coffee,
Mm-hmm.
but you really, it just has to be straight coffee, and it's better to have, did you say low pH? What was it?
Yeah, okay, high pH. My brain's on right now. It shut off at that point in the evening. So yes, so pH is basically a logarithmic measurement of acidity. It's hydrogen ions basically. And so the more basic something is, the less hydrogen ions it has. And so its pH is higher. And then as it goes down, it becomes more acidic. And so you kind of want a balanced pH. Your body is able to do pretty good with pH in general. Your body finds ways to handle acidity, but we just get so much acid in our diet. And so I just think it balances to have some more alkaline things in our diet. And when we do that, it's actually a really simple process. So when you take in something alkaline, your stomach actually takes and makes more hydrogen ions to make it more acidic, right? Where does it pull those hydrogen ions from? From the blood. And so it pulls it into the cells and then it pushes it out, which actually decreases your pH systemically. Increases your pH systemically. Keep switching this. So it makes you more alkaline. So, does that make sense? Yeah.
I read this book called Mastering Leptin, and it was came out right after the discovery of the hormone leptin, I think, and they were really big. Oh, this is going to be the new thing. And I thought of it when you mentioned ghrelin, because they said that leptin's very intertwined, and if you eat to like maximize your leptin sensitivity, which involves like not eating at night, not eating too much sugar, always leaving 3 to 5 hours between meals, then it has all these health benefits. But I think they were probably making it a little bigger than it actually is. And how big of a factor do you think it is?
Well, I think leptin's important. In fact, I test leptin levels primarily in cancer patients if they're overweight. And the reason I do that is there's a lot of studies that correlate with that too. But I'm able to basically say, look, we really got to get you insulin sensitive and get that under control. And it helps kind of drive that pathway to weight loss, which actually improves their cancer remission rates. And so I use it quite frequently, but mostly down that path. But it's a good measurement, and it is closely related to ghrelin. Yeah. So.
And when you're treating the person's leptin, that you see a lot of patterns change overall. They correlate.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, you're going to see it with people that are overweight generally. Yeah. That's just how it is. And so there's a lot of markers of correlation with obesity or just being overweight. There's a lot. And the goal really, so I want to focus on this as this really isn't just about weight loss. It can help with weight loss, but it helps with your overall health in a lot of different ways. But yeah, leptin is a big part of that pathway. So yeah, I look at all those, like the insulin. There's a lot of pieces you have to measure out. But really, the result is generally the same in terms of how you're going to address it. Yeah. So.
You talk about fasting and it's cleansing. What are we cleansing?
That's a good question.
So,
yeah, that's a really good question. So when I'm referring to cleansing, I'm really referring to allowing your digestive system to function without having a lot to digest. And by cleansing, I'm really referring to the autophagy system of cellular cleanup. So I'm not talking about like detoxing, because I think a lot of people refer to it as a detoxification. So it depends on what aspect you're focusing on.
So what are we intaking that's making us dirty?
So you're thinking from a toxin perspective, or?
Well, so you, at the beginning of your talk, and I certainly agree that it's better to do preventative than to do care for illness.
Yeah.
What is it that we're taking in that we should be aware of that maybe we shouldn't take as much in? What is it cleansing it? What's getting cleansed, and what is it that's here's a vacuum cleaner, when it's all done we open up the bag and throw the stuff out. Where does it come
Gotcha. Well, that is a big question. In fact, I've done entire presentations on like the things that we get from our environment. And so I'll give one example, maybe two, to kind of point in the direction. But so from a fasting perspective, the idea is that we accumulate a lot of cellular debris and garbage. And that cellular debris and garbage builds up not just from the regular processes in our cells, but from oxidative damage and particles that we can be intaking from our environment that causes that damage. So the one good example is our water intake. And water in Ashland is actually not too bad compared to a lot of them. But I can give you, fluoridation of water is a great example of something I'm not a big fan of. They put fluoride in the water as a way to help our teeth, but what does it do to us systemically? And is it really helping our teeth that much, right? So that's one example. Another would be all of the hormones and drugs that are ending up in our water supply. If you've seen recent research, we're starting to see extremely high levels of birth control being urinated into our system, and then it gets cleansed, but then it ends up back into our water supply. And you can actually, while I was at NAU, they were doing tests there to come up with strips to basically measure the amount of these hormones in our water supply, an easy way to do it for our government to do it. So the point I'm really making there is that there's a lot of environmental contaminants that we get in through our food, through our water, and that these contaminants are able to be cleansed through a deep cleansing system known as autophagy. And really, autophagy works because our liver functions better. So if our liver cells function better and our kidney cells function better, we function better and can get things out better. So does that help? There's just so much. That's a big, big question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. There's a lot there. Okay. Hey, you're welcome.
I'm curious about on the fasting days, does it make a difference if you drink the water throughout the day, really regularly, every hour, or if you make more meals out of it, drink a quart at a time?
Well, so that's a good question. I think generally speaking, you want to weigh your water towards the morning, a lot more water in the morning. On your fasting days, though, I like water as a replacement for food. In other words, if you're hungry and you're feeling that hunger, drink some water. And a lot of times that's all you need, and it takes place of it. Coffee actually has a unique effect too. Not just the caffeine. Caffeine acts a little bit like a diuretic too, but the coffee itself has a little bit of hunger suppression. So it actually will lower your ghrelin levels a little bit.
What about correlation between fasting and aging? Is it still healthy as you get older to do fasting?
It's actually very healthy for you to do fasting. Yeah, it's in fact, there's so many benefits to the aging, slowing the aging process from fasting. The difference is that you may not be able to handle as long a fast. In other words, you may need to work your way up, and that's just adapting to it. As we get older, we can't do as much as we used to be able to. And I can't say that for everyone, because there are some exceptions to that, for sure. Donnie's a great example. If you guys have met Donnie, do any of you know Donnie? Donnie Yance, who I work with at the clinic, he could outrun me on the basketball court very easily. So yeah, it's how you take care of yourself and how you adapt. And it's never too old to do that. In my last talk, I gave that example of, what's his name, Ugly, the English dentist who started doing weightlifting at 85 years old. The guy ended up living to 97, I think. But he won hundreds of awards, and he was in the best health and quality of life he had for 12 years. So that's how I point that out. So.
For a person who's had cancer, to keep reoccurrence away, what is the best? Is there a best one of those that you recommend? And what does the data show in terms of keeping that away?
Well, the data out there is really supportive of high levels of fruits and vegetables, primarily the dark leafy vegetables, and the really high antioxidant fruits and high polyphenol fruits. And there's a lot of data to support that, actually. As far as fasting goes, there's some data for ketogenic diet, there's some data for prolonged fasting, but there's not really been a study out there that says this is the best approach in terms of how often you do it. I've been honestly experimenting with it with a lot of people, watching their labs, and generally what I do, and it's just being very straightforward. I know it's not harmful, I know it helps them, but it's figuring out what the right balance is. And so for most of the patients that are trying to stay in remission, like I have a woman that I just talked to today about that, with breast cancer. And basically what I had her do is I said, try the 5-2 approach, because I think that's the best option for her. She's in her 40s, right, like early 40s. And so I think it was the right option for her. It may just doing like 1 day a week where you get that 36-hour cleanse could just be great. If you can do a couple days a month or a couple days every couple months, I think that's fantastic. You don't need to make fasting be all the time, right, if it's not right for you. But the goal is you want to be at this kind of ideal health range, and you want to see your markers all improve. And that's where it helps to have someone watching those things. But you can do it just watching yourself too.
And it doesn't really mess up your metabolic functions like this. It just seems like it would be kind of still on my
There is a
mind,
big-
you know, between
yeah.
stopping and starting and then
Mhm.
going back to eating regularly.
Yeah, that's a big, big thing. And I will tell you that almost everyone says that. That's a very common misconception, which is if you fast, you're gonna lose the weight, but you're gonna gain it right back.
Yeah.
And everyone talks about, well, you're gonna do that with the low caloric diet too. Any dietary approach that doesn't become a lifestyle, your body can't adapt to, and you're still not fully adapted to, and then your body, when you change it, goes back to where it was. And sometimes worse, because you jumped up and down, right? So the goal is you wanna find a pattern that you can bring into your lifestyle and not change. That's really the goal, a healthful pattern. So yeah, I really like the 5-2 approach. I like the alternate day approach. And then so there's a book out there that I would recommend. It's called The Switch. And I can't remember who the author is. I've read too many books. But this is all about the ketogenic diet and the Mediterranean diet. And what this author does is he goes really deep into the research on autophagy, but he shows how switching between the two is what gives you the benefits of the autophagy without pushing that pathway too far and making things worse, but also getting the benefits and all the healthful benefits of what's in the Mediterranean diet and not basically constantly pushing that pathway too. So he actually recommends a 2-month period of time where you're doing a good, clean, type of Mediterranean diet, and then 2 to 3 months, and then he'll do a month where he just does ketogenic. Yeah, but you can do fasting too and get that benefit too. So the idea is you want to switch it up a little bit to allow your body to heal and cleanse. And that cleansing that I'm referring to is basically helping yourself deal with a very toxic environment in which we live.
Right.
Yeah. So I think for long-term remission, that I think a good balance would be finding something you can do long-term and adding in, getting the deeper cleansing and the shorter cleansing consistently, but not all the time. General rules. And you have to find what works best for you, where you feel good.
Are you, my question is about the concept of structured water
Mm-hmm.
or water that changes the molecular structure of the water so that it enters the cells more readily. Do you find that? Because sometimes people drink a lot of water and they're still
Still a little dehydrated. That's a big topic to go down, but I would recommend looking into Victor Schauberger. If you want to learn more about him, you may already know, but Victor Schauberger was kind of the original person who was watching the rivers basically and was seeing the swirls that were happening in the river and was wondering the difference between that and this piped in water, and did that original research, and it's kind of grown from there. And so the idea of structured water is that it's more like what nature creates, as it moves through the streams and creates these little vortexes, and that it creates these tinier particles in the right structure so they absorb better. And some people use like the electrolysis of water basically to draw like some of the water and change its structure. I have a hard time with that because I think it pulls some of the garbage that's in our water to one side, and that can get a little heavy. So you got to be a little careful with those alkalization machines. They're okay short bursts, but yeah.
The reality for me of fasting is that I find it's helpful if I'm doing it with other people, and or even if we're not in the same space, but just knowing that there's some communication there, because it does take a commitment, and that's why the journal is probably a good idea. The other thing is that there's times when you just sense that, oh, I'm having a hard time right now, and little things to sort of help myself. Definitely drinking water is a good thing. I find also to do to something where I'm putting myself into some other space. So I might sit down and play the piano, or oh, I'm going to read for a while instead of working on something else that I'm doing. Just switch it up, because a lot of it, as with many things in life, distraction can be a real friend.
That's true. Yeah. And it's habit too, right? And changing what we're accustomed to. And like I said before, what we do around food in our lives is, when that's gone, is a really interesting thing. So it makes you change a lot of your habits that you do. Mine is just opening the fridge for no reason. So, who else does that? You're like, what's there? And I'm not even hungry. I just open the fridge. So.
You can also brush your teeth. That helps.
Yeah. Mary's really, she knows a lot of. This is my wife,
I don't
Mary.
really want to eat anything because I now have the toothpaste taste.
Yeah. She helped me do that too. We did it together when we were doing that. We still do. Okay, all good? All right.
As long as you have any more questions?
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.